And of course, let's not forget how beautiful this camera is. I can't stop talking about it. The JPEGs that you get out of this camera is incredible. But yeah, is this camera, really worth the hype? I mean, personally, I think... What is happening, everyone? Danny Feng here, and in this video we're going to be talking about the FUJI X100V. So the FUJI X100V has been a camera that's been circling around the internet quite a lot. Everyone's been talking about it so much and hyping it up so much, and the real question is this camera really worth the hype? And what is it about this camera that makes everyone so excited about? So let's get into it. So I've had the X100V. Look at this baby. Such a beautiful camera. So I've had this guy for about 3 years now. So back in 2020 when it dropped, I jumped on it instantly. I love the form factor. During that time I also got into film photography, so something at this size and at that kind of style was something that I was looking for, so this was absolutely perfect, and this is why I jumped on it so quick. Little did I know that it got back ordered very quick, and so many people missed out on the first batch of units, and they just had to wait for, some people actually waited for a year for their unit to come, which is crazy. So during those 3 years, I've shot quite a bit with this camera, and I'm going to share with you some things that I've discovered about this camera, and yeah, just to figure out whether this camera makes sense for you or not. So let's start with the good stuff. So first and foremost is the form factor. Like I said, this is such a tiny camera. The compactness is something that was super important for me, because at the time I was shooting on the Lumix GH5, and now I have the Sony a7 IV, which is this camera that I'm recording with. But these cameras are way too bulky. I don't like to carry, bulky cameras when I just want to have something that's just really easygoing to document my everyday life. When I'm traveling, I don't like to bring a rig like this with me, like a bulky camera. I just take this with me. So for example, my most recent trip, I went to London, brought just this camera with me, took a bunch of photos. I'll put some up, you can see some examples. Yeah, so the form factor was such a big deal for me, and if you're looking for a camera that you can literally just put in your pocket and just go out and start shooting, this is definitely a camera that you should look into. So the next thing about this camera, which I guess for some people it's a bad thing, but for me I think it's absolutely a fantastic thing, which is it is a fixed lens. It is mounted permanently on the camera. You can't take it out, it's not interchangeable, but I love that. I actually love that because it takes away the impulse of you actually always wanting to change lenses and being, indecisive. I've fallen into that headspace, when I'm taking photos, especially if I decide to take, let's say, the Sony a7 IV out. I always go out with a zoom lens, and I just sometimes have this indecisiveness on which focal length that I want. But having something like this, which this focal length over here is the 23mm, it just forces you in this creative restriction. And yeah, you just got to work with what you have, which I think it's a really nice exercise as a creative, and quite frankly, 23mm for a camera like this, because this is an APS-C camera. This camera, I would always use it mainly for, everyday documentation, doing street photography kind of stuff. The 23mm lens is super diverse for that kind of shooting. This lens also opens up to f2, if you can see, which is awesome, because not only you can let in a lot of light, so you can do some low light shooting, but you also get that nice blurry background kind of thing, nice bokehs and stuff like that. So the next thing that is amazing about this camera is the JPEG files that you get out of the FUJI X100V. So in the beginning, when I bought this camera, I just shot everything exclusively in RAW. I just didn't even think twice about JPEGs. All the DSLRs and mirrorless cameras I've ever worked with, if I shoot photos, always just shot it RAW. It was just kind of like a no-brainer, you can do so many things in post with RAW. But then I started reading, a little bit more about people exclusively just shooting JPEG, and how, Fuji's JPEG is amazing because they have all this film emulations that you can get when you're shooting JPEG. It gets baked into the JPEG, and then you get kind of like a film-like photo. So that got me thinking, should I experiment with JPEGs? Maybe let's try out the profiles and stuff. And yeah, I decided to just give it a go, and the JPEGs that you get out of this camera is incredible. In fact, nowadays when I shoot on this camera, I just shoot exclusively JPEG, and when I bring it back onto my computer to do a little bit of editing, the editing is mostly just maybe fixing crop and just adjusting exposure and contrast, and that's it. Oh, and also grain as well. If I want to, I would add a little bit more grain. And that's pretty much it. This JPEG process is something that I completely fell in love with because it resembles very much like how it works when you're shooting actual film. So you take it to the lab and the lab will develop and scan it. And once I get the scans, you get the color rendition of the film stock that you're shooting on. And then if I decide to adjust anything, really I would just adjust, you know, exposure and a little bit of contrast, and that's it. I think this process is super interesting because you end up just freeing yourself from all these barriers and you're kind of just enjoying everything in the present. And if there's a moment that you want to take a photo of, you know, you can just take a photo and then that's pretty much it. You know, if you want to bring it in post after, there's only like 2 sliders that I work with, you know, exposure and contrast, and that's it. And I can post it, I can share it. If you're a person that doesn't want to do too much of like the post-production kind of stuff and you just want to just enjoy moments, just capture it at this kind of size, you know, this is definitely the camera for you. And of course, let's not forget how beautiful this camera is. I can't stop talking about it because it really looks absolutely beautiful. And there is just something about the way how it is, it just feels very inspiring. You know, it feels very inspiring when you go out and shoot with this camera. It also resembles like an actual analog camera as well. You know, you get the dials up here, you know, you get the viewfinder as well. To me also, it's very important that, you know, when I do take out a camera like this, for example, it just feels inspiring to just go out and, you know, take photos with it, you know, because if it's like this, for example, the Sony, I love the Sony a7 IV camera. This is a brilliant camera, but you know, for client work is amazing and stuff, but just for my personal, creative, everyday thing, it's not an inspiring camera. It's too perfect, you know, all the bells and whistles are there, you know. I can pretty much do anything and everything that I want with this camera, but having a camera that's like this, where I just shoot JPEG, you got a fixed focal length, you know, it has this feeling of like you're shooting on film. But yeah, it always just feels so inspiring to go out and shoot with this particular camera. Okay, another cool thing about this camera is this little flippy screen out here, which is great because then, you know, instead of shooting like this, you know, or if you're shooting like this, you can shoot from the hip, as they say. You know, you can flip it out and you can put it at your hip. You can take street photography, stuff like this, you know. If you really want to go low angle, you know, you can have this little flippy screen come up so you can see what you're framing. So this is a really, really nice touch. And also, before I forget, the screen is super, super clear. You'll definitely notice if something is out of focus. So having a very clear screen is also a plus. Now, some people have complained about the battery life about this camera, but for me, I've never really had a problem with the battery. And it's also partly because on the way how I shoot. When I shoot, you know, it's just like, you know, I'll turn it on, you know, I'll take a photo and then just turn it off. And then when I want to take a photo, I'll just do the same thing, take a photo and then turn it off. Some people like to just keep it on, you know, and they just go around and take photos and stuff, and that obviously drains your battery. But because I shoot in this particular way, battery life hasn't ever been an issue for me. I actually just carry 2 batteries with me, and usually the first battery never runs out. I remember I went on a trip for 3 days once, and shooting the way that I shoot, you know, I lasted the whole trip just with 1 battery. So if you're the kind of person that constantly, you know, turns your camera on and off when you're shooting, you know, then this shouldn't be an issue. So there's plenty of videos out there that talk about like the bad stuff about the Fuji X100V, but for me it's just one thing. So it's just the video mode on this camera. So personally, this is kind of nitpicking because I don't actually use this camera for video ever. I think I used it once. It's not for that purpose. For me, this is literally just a photo only camera. So for me right now, I'm just kind of nitpicking. But I do want to cover this in case you're a person who is looking to shoot photos and videos using this camera. So the first thing is, I mean, it's great that this camera can shoot 4K, you know, 24, 25, 60 frames, you know, and it looks great out of camera. But the downside is that this camera does overheat if you do shoot in 4K. So if you do shoot for a long period of time, it does overheat and it can shut down. If you're shooting little clips here and there, you know, for social media and stuff like that, I think it's fine. I think you can get away with it. But if you want to shoot like long form stuff, not only the camera does get quite hot, but it does overheat. So that's something you need to consider. The other thing is that the way how you get into video mode is a little bit long-winded. Maybe it's just me, maybe I haven't figured it out, but basically to get into the video mode, you have to go into the menu and scroll all the way to the bottom, and then you have to adjust like your settings and stuff, and then you can start shooting. So I kind of wish that there was kind of like a quick button that I can just switch between video and photo. If you're the kind of person that likes to work extremely quick, this camera is not for you. So now the ultimate question is, who is this camera for? Now, personally, I feel like this camera is perfect for people who just want like a small compact camera that they can take with them everywhere, every day, you know, and just document their life. It's also great for street photography as well. So if you're into that, this is the perfect camera for that kind of stuff. Now, I wouldn't suggest this for professional client work, even though this can be a professional camera. The only reason is because since this is just a 23mm lens, if this is going to be your primary camera for client work, it will be a little bit restricting. There's times where maybe a 50 might make more sense. You know, maybe you're doing portraits, maybe you need an 85 to get nice and tight shots. You know, you can't really do this with this camera. Though there is this digital zoom thing, but still, like, you lose quality by doing so because you're basically just punching into the image, which is not that great. But yeah, is this camera, you know, really worth the hype? I mean, personally, I think no. I think it's only hyped up because, you know, scarcity and FOMO and all that good stuff. And also, let's not forget, this camera is not, you know, super cheap as well. I mean, how much is it nowadays, you know? Right now, this camera goes for 1,599 euros. And, you know, that's a huge chunk of change just to have a camera that is your, you know, daily use camera just to take daily life stuff, you know? So that's also something to consider as well. You know, if you do have the budget and you just want to have this fun toy to have in your bag, you know, when you're going out, when you're traveling, you know, this is the perfect camera for that kind of stuff. For me, the reason that I invested in this camera, it just keeps my creativity going. And because I get to exercise my creativity with this camera, you know, this of course translates to my professional work when I do video and photo works for clients. So yeah, that's it for me today, everyone. I hope you found this video helpful. If you have any questions, just drop it in the comments below and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. And of course, if you like this video and subscribe because it does help my channel. And I'll see you all in the next video. And until then, keep on creating, keep on inspiring.